Kids, thanks for watching. I'm Professor Thomas, your Genius Mentor here with Junior Genius. This year we're going to be spending the majority of the time working on ACT preparation, but we will learn how to think quicker, we will learn how to answer questions, and we will get our homework done faster. Also, I do have another side job. I travel around the world as a cryptozoologist and help solve unsolvable mysteries. So sometimes I have to travel overseas. So, jeez. Excuse me. Junior Genius, we solve mysteries. It's Professor Thomas speaking. Yes. What? A ghost in a boxcar? Sure, we'll take it. Just send in the details in my email. Yep. Thank you. Bye now. Kids, we just got our first assignment. There's a creepy ghost haunting an abandoned boxcar. We're going to have to travel down to the south into Malaysia and see what's going on there.
Frederick Tower, Skyhawk 53010, runway 23, ready for takeoff, patterns.
Says 53010, Frederick Tower, make left close traffic, report midfield downwind, runway 23, cleared for takeoff.
53010, clear for takeoff, runway 23, left close traffic.
I've never been in a small plane like this before. I hope this is safe. How long have you been flying? No answer? Yeah. I know, you're trying to focus. Okay, I'll just be quiet.
Kids, hey, we made it here to the train graveyard. As you can see behind me here, the abandoned boxcars are stationary, unmoving objects because they've been discarded. In 1951, these dependent boxcars were connected, attached or linked to the independent engine. As the locomotive pulled away, the boxcars stayed in the train yard. The boxcars were now alone and vulnerable, open for unwanted ghosts to move in. A ghost came along and moved into the abandoned boxcar, an isolated train car now separated away from the engine. The best way to get rid of a ghost in a boxcar is to reconnect, relink the boxcar back to the locomotive engine. I feel like Junior Genius is a lot like the cartoon show Scooby-Doo, a TV series about wacky, crazy adventures.
Hey kids, so here's the plan. What we're gonna do is just hang out here till dark. We'll take a camera, a tripod, throw it back out into the train graveyard, see if we could catch some ghosts on film. For now, let's just hang out. Hey kids, so looks like it's starting to get dark out. We got the camera set up and everything, and I'm just gonna go ahead and have the remote on. I'm gonna come back in a couple of hours. I'm gonna get out of here. It's pretty creepy. Pretty creepy in here tonight. So, let's see what happens.
Kids, there definitely is a ghost in the boxcar. Did you see it? Remember, how do we get rid of a ghost in a boxcar? You simply reconnect the boxcar back to the locomotive engine. Let's go ahead and look at that statement a little further.
Kids, when we went back to the train yard and we tried to reconnect the boxcar back to the locomotive engine, I looked at the hitch real close, and to me it looked a heck of a lot like a comma. Let's jump on into the lesson and learn about how to use one comma. The story of the abandoned boxcars is analogous to one comma. Kids, whenever you have one comma, you're going to have an independent clause connected to a dependent clause. The comma is like a little train hitch. Let's go ahead and look at the story from the abandoned train yard. First part of that story was, the abandoned boxcars are stationary. That's an independent clause, just like a complete sentence. We see a comma there. Unmoving objects, because they've been discarded. That's a dependent clause. The dependent clause gives you more information about the independent clause. In fact, it gives you more information about the word right before the comma. Please take note of that. This is like a little mini definition of the word right before the comma. Here's our mini definition. Here is our key word. Stationary, what is it? It's unmoving. All right, on to the second sentence. The second sentence says, in 1951, these dependent boxcars were connected. That's an independent clause, complete sentence. Then we have our comma, attached or linked to the independent engine. That's a dependent clause fragment. Connected and attached or linked. You see how this is basically a Scooby-Doo saying the same thing? It's giving you a mini definition or more information about that one word, kids, right before the comma. Please take note. On to the next sentence. It's a little bit different, but look and see how this is used. Here we have a dependent clause connected with an independent clause. As the locomotive pulled away, that's dependent or fragment, now we see that we have an independent at the end. The boxcars stayed in the train yard. It's independent. You see how pulling away and staying are going to be opposite? Now remember, when you go ahead and do this a different way, you start with a dependent clause in the front. Usually you're going to have some type of a time relation. As the locomotive pulled away, see how that's time related? Here's another example. In 1951, there's a comma there. That's time related. Remember, when you start off a sentence with a dependent clause, have usually some time relationship there. Let's move on to sentence 4. The boxcars were now alone and vulnerable. That's an independent clause, complete sentence. Comma, open for unwanted ghosts to move in. That's a dependent clause or fragment. And when you are vulnerable, guess what? You're open for ghosts to come into your boxcar. This is like a little mini definition, kids. A ghost came along and moved into the abandoned boxcar, independent clause. An isolated train car now separated away from the engine. Here is like the little mini definition, which is a dependent clause, giving you more information about the one word right before it. Independent, dependent, connected together, just like two train cars, an engine and a boxcar. Kids, the best way to get rid of a ghost in a boxcar is to reconnect, comma, relink the locomotive engine back to the boxcar, independent and dependent. The dependent clause gives you more information about the one word right before the comma, reconnecting and relinking. Let's look at the last sentence. I feel like Junior Genius is a lot like Scooby-Doo, a cartoon series about wacky, crazy adventures. Independent clause, dependent clause. Dependent clause gives you more information about the one word right before the comma. What is Scooby-Doo? It's a cartoon series.
Kids, hey, we made it here to the train graveyard. As you can see behind me here, the abandoned boxcars are stationary, unmoving objects because they've been discarded. In 1951, these dependent boxcars were connected, attached or linked to the independent engine. As the locomotive pulled away, the boxcars stayed in the train yard. The boxcars were now alone and vulnerable, open for unwanted ghosts to move in. ghost came along and moved into the abandoned boxcar. An isolated train car, now separated away from the engine. The best way to get rid of a ghost in a boxcar is to reconnect. Relink the boxcar back to the locomotive engine. I feel like Junior Genius is a lot like the cartoon show Scooby-Doo, a TV series about wacky, crazy adventures. I'm learning a ton about English grammar. Boring stuff that most teachers don't teach very well.
The main thing to take away from the abandoned boxcar lesson is a comma, one comma, links an independent clause to a dependent clause, just like a train hitch. An independent clause is kind of like the engine, the train, the locomotive. And the dependent clause is like the boxcar. Why? Because the independent clause can move around. It's got its own power to do whatever it wants because it's independent. The dependent clause means it's not able to do anything because it needs the engine. The dependent clause is non-essential information in a sentence that will lead you back and give you more information about that one word right before the comma. Implications for ACT test, kids. Look to see what comes just after the comma to see if it's like a mini description of the main word just before the comma. If it's not, no comma is needed. Let's take a look at two examples to illustrate this point. Example number 1. Now that I know how to use commas, that's an independent clause. Little things that look like train hitches, that's a dependent clause. The dependent clause is there to give you more information about the one word right before the comma. Little things that look like train hitches, what's that? That is a comma. You see that? That sentence is used correctly. Example number 2. Now I know how to use commas. That's an independent clause. Thanks to Junior Genius. That's a dependent clause. Does this dependent clause give you more information about the word right before? Thanks to Junior Genius, is that like a little mini description of a comma? Look at it real close, kids. Remember, in this particular case, no comma. Commas are like little mini train hitches. What comes after the comma is going to be a little miniature description. That's an incomplete sentence or fragment. That's why we call it dependent. It's dependent on the independent clause. Thanks for watching, kids. Abandoned Boxcar, Episode 1. Hello, Junior Genius. We solve mysteries. Huh? Who? A famous fortune teller? Sounds like another mystery to me.